And now let's jump back over. This example we've been looking at. So what about all these other parts of this website? We can now kind of take from our larger main structural elements and begin to come down. We're still dealing with some larger areas. And our example here does a good job of designating those. For example, here they have this with a background of white, which is separating it from this with a background of white, separating it from this with a background of white. And if we take a look at it, we can see with the text content, it has some structure to it as well. This text is bigger, it's larger, it's at the top. This text here, it's bigger and it's larger and it's at the top of its own little area, but it's smaller than this text up here. So keep those things in mind. Also, we have these kind of random side areas over here. We're going to now learn about all of those different areas. One last one I want to point out before we move on is here. So sponsored content, we have all of this area, but then we have this, and we have this, and we have this. So what I'm trying to get across is that content, you have to always visually kind of think about it as groupings. And you start with the larger groupings when you're coding, and then you come into the smaller until you finally get to the text content and the image content in the smallest pieces of that website. All right, so I'm going to jump over here. We've added our main structural tags. And this next, this example here is showing you kind of what we did, how you could visually think about it even though we don't see it yet. The reason we don't see it yet is things like spacing and color, background color, things like that, those are final touches. Until you actually add them, you don't see them, but that doesn't mean the area isn't there. So we learned about block level elements and inline elements. Block level elements are these larger elements, and they react to the browser in a very specific way. They stack on top of each other. Inline elements, however, sit next to each other. So when you're first building your website, you're dealing with the block level elements first. Then you can get into those inline elements. Those block level elements, they do stack on top of each other, but they do a couple of other things. By browser default, so remember browser defaults from the quiz. Browser defaults are how the browser applies styling when you don't have any. Later, we're going to learn CSS, and that's how we add styling to our HTML documents. But for now, we're not doing that yet. So where does the styling come from? It comes from the browser, and each browser has its own defaults. So Chrome has a set of defaults, Safari set of defaults, Internet Explorer, Firefox. Most of the time, they're very similar, but you can't always rely on that. The browser defaults could be a bit different between different browsers. When you are coding, if you want to do it really clean, you want to keep the browser defaults when they work for you. So what that means is know the browser defaults, and if that styling works for you, you don't need to add styling. Just build from the browser defaults. If, however, the browser default isn't working for you, later you can use CSS to override those browser defaults. But the browser defaults for block level elements, they stack on top of each other, but they also have a width and a height. The width is 100% of its parent element. So far, we have HTML. HTML is the oldest ancestor. the oldest parent. So that HTML right now is 100% of the viewport. Inside the HTML, we have the head, which isn't visual, so we're not going to talk about that anymore. We have the body. The body is a block level element. It is 100% of its parent. The parent is the HTML. It's 100% of the HTML, which is 100% of the viewport. So right now, the body is 100% of the viewport. Later, we could go in and say, well, actually, I don't want it to be 100%. I want it to be smaller than its parent. And you add CSS styling to do so. But for now, it's going to stretch all the way across your viewport screen. And so on. So in the body, we have header, main, and footer. By browser default, they are 100% of the parent. So right now, they are 100% of the viewport. So as you start to add text content or image content inside of these larger structural elements, by browser default, the background is transparent. So you don't see, I'm going to bounce back over here to our example. As you begin to code, you don't see where each element begins and ends. You just have to know it. So you just have to know that this is a block level element, and it's right now, the width is 100% of its parent. The height is different. The height for a block level element comes from its content. And that gets tricky because if it has no content, it has no height. So until you start to add content or styling, you don't even see it. It's still there. It's still this invisible container that could hold content or styling, but you haven't done it yet. So don't let that fool you. You always got to think about these invisible containers as you code these elements. So looking at this diagram, we see our code that we've added over here in the left-hand column. That's what we've already added into our HTML document. But in theory, this is where we eventually want to get to. So here we have header at the top, we have main inside, we have footer at the bottom. Those are nested inside the body. The body's nested inside the HTML. But until we start to add styling, we won't actually see it that way yet. All right, as we want to start to break up into smaller and smaller pieces of that website, we are going to move on to our minor structural tags. So we're still relatively large in our groupings, but we're inside those main structural tags. So our minor structural tags are going to be section and article. Section and article are kind of strange. They are structural tags, but whereas I told you that header, main, and footer, you're only going to have one of those in each HTML document. These minor structural tags, you're going to often see more than one. And in our project 1, we will see more than one. So section and article are used to break up content, usually inside the main element. You might randomly find them in other areas, depends on who did the coding, but for the most part, these are used to break up that main element. Because remember, the main element is all of what is in regards to that particular web page. So each HTML document inside the main is going to have a different number of sections and a different number of articles. Section and article at this point are interchangeable. I could take the main element and break it up into sections, and then if there's a lot of content in each section, I could then break the section up into articles. But I could do it opposite. I could have articles, and inside the articles, sections. I could, but most commonly now is section as the larger element and then articles inside of section. So let's take a look at that example really quick. Here, let's come back up to the top. And right now I'm not going to talk about ads. So this banner here, just ignore it for now. That's something different. So our actual content is here. This is our first section. But inside that section, I have one article, and probably this whole thing is one article. But then I have this as article 2. And that article is even broken up further. I have 1, 2, 3. So these groupings of content you're kind of thinking about. We're not going to talk about it to a great extent right now because you're not going to use it in your first project. But these little random guys over here on the side, these are what are called aside. So the element is aside. Aside is used when you have content that is relevant to your website, but not necessarily directly related to the content of that page. So for example, we have an ad here. Ads are usually in an aside or a banner at the top. But even a little bit further down, this Hurricane Central, it has to do with the website, but it doesn't necessarily have to do directly with what's being discussed over here in the larger area. But if we take a look at that larger area again, we said this would be a section, which means that this would be a section, and this would be a section, and this would be a section. So in our code, we would code each of those sections individually. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to jump back over. And here inside main, because remember that main content, even though we haven't even added content yet, we already know we're going to have content. And for the most part, if a client tells you what to add to a website, or in your case, I'm going to tell you what to add to your website, so you're already going to know you do need these sections and articles. So I'm going to go inside main, and just for now, let's add in 3 sections. So I'll go ahead and add in an opening section tag. It then added my closing. And I'm going to make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to select that section opening and closing tag, and I'm going to copy it, Command C. I'm going to move my cursor and return to the next line. And actually, I said I'm going to add 3 sections. I'm going to show you a little trick with brackets. So that means I'm going to go ahead and hit return one more time because I know that eventually I'm going to have a section, and a section, 3 lines. I've copied this first section. I now want to add the next 2, and in brackets I can do it at the same time because I can have multiple cursors. So I'm going to place my cursor where I want the first line to copy. Then I'm going to hold Command on my keyboard. And again, this is on a Mac. You'll have to look it up for Windows. Then I'm going to click where I want my next cursor. I let go of Command, and I'm going to move so you can see. I now have 2 cursors. That means when I Command V to paste, I can paste both those lines at the same time. I still have 2 cursors, so I have to be careful. If I just started typing, I'd type on both lines. So if I don't want to do that, I need to remember to click so I get just 1 cursor back. Something else is that I can select multiple lines of text. What that means is, let's say I select this section. And if I move my cursor down, I select all 3 that I move over. But let's say I only want to select the first and third section. There's another trick that I have in brackets. I'm going to select that first section. Then I'm going to hold Command on the keyboard. While I hold Command, I can select that third line, let go of Command, and I now have selected 2 different lines without selecting that middle line. So if I did start to type, I can affect those 2 lines without affecting the one in between. I don't want that, so I'm going to go ahead and Command Z to undo. Command Z. All right, so now I have 3 sections. Let's say that first section, like our example, has 4 articles. So here in section, I'm going to go ahead and hit return, give myself some room, and tab over to add my articles. So I'm going to add 1 article. I'm going to select that article and copy it, Command C. I'm going to give myself some room, so I'm going to hit return 3 times. Then I need 3 cursors, so I have placed my cursor for the first one. I hold Command, place the second, place the third, let go of Command. Then I can Command V to paste in those multiple articles. Remembering those tricks can really help you speed up coding. Okay, so here now inside main, I have my first section that has 4 articles, my second section, and my third section. Those are the minor structural elements. I'm going to go ahead and Command S to save, and let's bounce back over to take a look at what it could look like once we add in styling. So far we've had, and I did this a little bit different than this example, but I have my code over here on the left and the example over on the right. So here I have header, then after that main, which I've broken up into 3 sections, and this middle section I've broken up into 3 articles. All right, for now, let's go ahead and end this video here. It's probably getting pretty long, and we'll move on to text formatting in the next video.